Well, hey, you guys, welcome back to another episode. This is episode 123, How to Be Consistently Creative. What I wanted to share with you today is how to create consistently without burning yourself out. And there's several ways that we do this, and I'm going to be sharing specifics inside of the episode today. But I want you to get yourself in the right headspace when you are creative and how to create content consistently, because that is something that feels good, particularly if this is a business venture for you. Your creative outlet becomes something that you want to generate income from. So first, I want to kind of define what I think creativity means. So for me, creativity is taking an idea or something that you have imagined and making it concrete, making it into something that is out there in the world. And there's lots of different ways that we can do this, right? But creativity in and of itself is taking a spiritual concept and making it physical. There are pieces all along the way, from the conception of an idea all the way to a finished product. There are phases of creativity that have to be applied all along the way. And sometimes that's even like solving problems and overcoming obstacles in the way. We have to get creative at doing that in order to create that finished product. So, like I said, there are infinite ways for us to be creative in our lives, right? We can create art, we can write, we can create music. We can start and grow a business. And these two things can actually be the same thing. We can actually create a business around the art that we produce. And I know for me, when I started my business, one of the things that I thought was that my business couldn't be fun. I kind of had separated the business side of what it was that I want to create with actually coaching and creating content and, creating my podcast and all those things. I thought in my mind that those two things were separate, and that if I was now using my creativity to make money, it couldn't be fun. It had to all be serious. And I thought there was the way to run a business. And I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what that way was. But what I've realized after doing this for a while was that is not a thing. One of the things that is true is that everyone out there who owns a business, there are certain elements of that business where they're making things up. They are being creative along the way. And I didn't allow myself to be that way. I didn't allow myself to be creative in my business side of things because I was trying so hard to duplicate what someone else had done. One of the things that I learned from Brooke Castillo, who is the founder of the Life Coach School where I'm certified, is she said, I'm not going to tell you how to run a business, because the way that you run your business is going to be really different from the way that I run my business. And I used to get really frustrated with that. I'm like, no, just tell me how. Like it's working for you. Just tell me how you've done it. But the truth is, anytime we share a system or the way that we specifically do things with someone else, it's not going to work 100% the way that it works for us, because they're a different person. And I didn't realize that. I didn't allow myself to be creative in that space because I kept trying to tell myself that there was a right way and I was doing it wrong. If I didn't have the success that they were having, it was because I hadn't figured out the secret. And yeah, there are certain mechanics of a business, like maybe some marketing things or some funnels that you can kind of duplicate the frame of it, but you can't duplicate the message, because you are going to be different. And what you're offering out into the world is going to be different from what's out there because it's yours. The truth is there is a lot of creativity in a business. There is your marketing message, there's your brand, there's your copy, and of course, there's your products. And what I have really opened up to over the last year is I'm going to do this my way. I have great ideas to share with people, and I know information that can change their lives. And I am going to do it my way. And for me, that was really freeing, because I've always felt from the time that I was young that I was a very creative person. But when I started my business, I was scared to get it wrong. And I don't know if any of you creatives out there can relate to that you're afraid to put your stuff out there because you're afraid to do it wrong. The truth is, as creatives, we're going to put stuff out into the world that people aren't going to like. And for a long time, I was afraid of that. I was afraid of being judged. I was afraid that people weren't going to like my stuff. And that's just the truth of being a creative. You're not going to make everyone happy with what it is that you create. And you see this all the time with artists, right? I can see how their art isn't for everyone. And that's okay. And sometimes I run across an artist, I'm like, that's not really for me. And that's okay. But for me, I really had to get over this. And it's one of the things that has kept me feeling stuck for a long time, is not leaning into my creativity and feeling like I've got great ideas that can actually sell my products and I can do it my way. It can be a way that no one else is doing it. And that's okay. So I want to talk a little bit about the benefits of being creative. And then, of course, I'm going to talk about the cons of being creative as well. So I think some of the benefits of being creative is you get to have fun, right? Art was one of my very favorite subjects when I was a kid, because for me, it was all fun. And I have really tried to encourage my kids, do it your way. I'm not going to show you an art project of how to create this sunflower out of tissue paper so that you can do it my way. I want you to have the tissue paper and I want you to create whatever it is that you want to create. And the other thing that I loved about art, and this is kind of my competitive nature coming through, is I thought I was good at it. But I think what I really enjoyed about it was just the process of creating. We like to do things that we think we're good at. And for me, I just really enjoyed the process of creating, and I liked what it was that I created. But there are some cons to creativity. And I want to share these with you because if we're not careful, I feel like these cons can get in the way. It kind of shuts us down a little bit. If you have a hobby right now that is your creative outlet, and you're not trying to monetize this hobby, and you just love creating for the opportunity to create something, then continue on that path, my friend. That is amazing. But at some point, you might want to monetize what it is that you are creating. When you turn a hobby into a business, I think sometimes people are fearful because they tell themselves, well, I don't want to start a business around my creative outlet because it won't be fun for me anymore. And the truth is, when you create a business around a creative outlet, you have to consistently crank out content. And the content needs to be unique. It needs to be yours. You don't want to be samey with other people out there, because then it's just their stuff that you're duplicating, right? So in order to create something, I think this is one of the things that I really want to emphasize. You want to hold on to all the elements of fun around a creative outlet. And a business, for sure, even the businessy side of running a business can be fun. It totally can be fun. But there is also an element of timelines and deadlines and creating content for people to keep your business afloat that can add that extra pressure. But I want you to understand it's not from the business and it's not from what it is that you're creating. It's the way that you are thinking about it. And whether or not something is fun is totally optional. So there are days where I have to manage my mind to make things fun. And I have to push pause and be like, okay, I'm not having fun right now. How can I make this more fun for myself? How can I actually enjoy the process of doing this? I'm much better at this than when I first started my business. When I first started, I'd agonize over what people thought about my content. Just writing an email, for example, I would start to get sweaty. I'd start to just second guess myself and doubt what it was that I was putting out there. And I think it's because actually I got some hate mail early on. When I first started running ads on Facebook, this was several years ago, I had no idea how to handle that. She sent me, I think it was a she just sent me these really mean, nasty emails. And so I figured out how to cut her off so that I wasn't sending her emails anymore for her to respond to. But for me, that was terrifying. Just an email. from somebody I didn't even know who didn't like my stuff. It really zapped my creativity because I was so worried about how my stuff was landing with other people. And I made it mean so much. Now I get emails from people that don't like my products or whatever, and it's not really a big deal. But one of the things that I want to say is, I know for some people, turning a hobby into a business feels really natural and it flows and they just generate income and they grow their business. And it seems like a pretty linear process. But I know for myself, when I started running a business and being a coach, there were so many things about this experience for me that shut off my creativity because I didn't feel like I was really good at anything. I didn't feel like I was a very good coach. I didn't feel like I was a very good business owner. I didn't feel like I was a very good writer. I didn't feel like I was a very good podcaster. I mean, there's a lot of things that I felt like weren't awesome out of the gate. And I totally judged myself for that. Instead of being like, hey, you're new here. You're not going to knock it out of the park your first year or your second year. And that's okay. And the truth is I know the stuff that I produce now, several years into my business is not going to look as good to me as it will 10 years from now. And that's okay. So I really had to learn how to stay in my own lane with the stuff that I am creating and my journey, because I think sometimes we have these really beautiful images of what it is that we want to create in our minds, and what we actually create isn't in alignment with that. And that's okay. It takes time in order for us to get there. So I had to get really good at managing my own mind. Because for all of us, what happens when we are creating something and we put it out into the world for people to say, yes, I want that, or no, that's not for me, is our inner critic starts to rear its ugly head. And fortunately, I found some really good books early on that were really helpful, that I recognized, hey, I'm not alone in this. Other creatives and other people who are really successful still are experiencing the things that I'm experiencing. So how are they dealing with it and moving forward with their work instead of letting it shut them down? So the two books that I would recommend to you is Julia Cameron's The Artist's Way and Stephen Pressfield's The War of Art. So both of those books are excellent. In fact, over the years, I have saved and held on to fewer and fewer books. I used to buy multiple books a month, but now I love to save my favorites. These books are still on my shelf, and they're ones that I would highly recommend to you if you're kind of in the beginning of your creative journey on something, or you feel like you're getting stuck. These two books are really going to help you. And they, like I said, they helped me feel like I was less alone in this process. So the second thing that I want to say is, anytime you sit down and you're going to create, particularly if this is now a business venture for you, you're going to feel, like I said, like you're not very good. You thought it was going to be fun and it's not. But the truth is it can be. It can be a lot of fun. But the other piece of this is some days it's not fun. It's just hard. And that's okay. There are things that for me, I have really loved learning about myself as I've gone through this journey. And that is kind of what we're up against anytime we create, anytime we are evolving into the next version of ourselves, which I feel like creative outlets totally help us to do. Anytime we are on that journey and on that path, some days are just hard. Okay. Another con to creating is that we can get stuck creating. We can get stuck in this loop of getting ready to get ready to get ready and not actually putting our products and services out there into the world. So I love a lot of the creative aspects of my business. I love the graphic design. I love creating courses. I love thinking about ways to serve my clients at the highest level. For example, right now I'm actually creating an app, which is so much fun because it uses all three elements of this. It uses the graphic design, it uses the course creation, and I get to serve my clients. I'm really excited about their experience with my products on this app. Comes to a point where you have to put it out there. You have to stop creating and tell yourself, this is good enough. Now I'm going to test my products. I'm going to see how the market responds to what it is that I have created, which means you will get rejected. Not everything that you create people are going to resonate with or people are going to like. And that's okay. And you might have some products that completely bomb. And it could be the product. It could also be how you're marketing it. So there are different ways that you can come about selling a product that you've created, but you want to keep your creative juices flowing, because this is how we overcome obstacles. Is we're like, okay, this isn't landing. Why not? And you have to get creative with what you're going to try next. And for me, I didn't want to do that. I wanted to get it right. I wanted someone to show me their process. I wanted to do it the way someone else was doing it. We can't do that. So what I'm telling you is you want to be able to turn that part of your brain on and turn the judgment part of your brain off when we're doing this. Okay. All right. So I crank out a lot of content. I create content every single week, almost daily. I'm creating masterclass content. I'm creating course content. I'm creating podcasts or social media posts. I also teach yoga. I teach 3 to 4 classes every single week. And even when I'm teaching yoga, I'm creating sequences as I go along in my classes. And there's lots of ways that we do this as women and as moms. We're constantly creating. I mean, sometimes it's just creating a new bedtime routine, or sometimes it's creating a dinner out of things that we have in our pantry, right? But if you are the business owner, you need to understand your business is part of your brain. It is part of your vision. It came from your mind. And for a long time, I wanted someone to read my mind and tell me what to do, or tell me that I had great ideas and tell me how to sell them and market them, because that way I wouldn't have to do the scary thing. But this isn't the way it works with our ideas. There are no magic mind readers out there. If this is something that you created, you have to keep creating. So how do you consistently create? How do you do this, especially when you don't feel like it, or you'd rather be doing something else, or your mind gremlins swoop in and start talking you out of all of your great ideas, or you're having a human moment and you get sick, or you're experiencing a loss and you don't have the energy to put into creating? How do you do this? So I wanted to talk about a few different things, and I kind of broke them down into 2 branches. So we have the physical aspect of the creation process, and we also have the mental piece of it. So I'm going to actually talk about the physical aspect of creating, because I think for a lot of us, that's a lot easier. So the first thing that I want to say is you need to know yourself. You need to know when your best time of day is for you to create. And that time needs to be protected, and it needs to be saved for your creative work. What we often do is we want to do all the little easy things first and tell ourselves, okay, when my calendar is clear, or when my desk is clear, or when my kitchen is cleaned, then I'll be able to get to my creative work. And that will zap your time like nothing else, because we'll tell ourselves, I'll just get to it later. It's a really beautiful way our brain loves to get us to procrastinate. I'll just do this later. And we get busy doing a lot of these unimportant tasks in our life that seem important to us, but they're not actually moving the needle forward on your creative work. So the first thing is you need to know what your best time of day is and time block that for yourself. So the time I'm actually creating this podcast is in the morning. Mornings are my best time of day to get things done. I love to get my hardest work done first. When I get my hardest work done first, it seems like I just get a boost of momentum. It's like getting a shot of inspiration that I just gave myself that gets me going on all the other things for the day. So for you, evenings might be the best time, but that means that you're not scheduling things on top of that time block. All right, the next thing that I want to say is you need to create a routine around your creative work. So you want to be thinking about how you can use the least amount of mental energy for what it is that you're doing that are the same every single time. So let me give you an example of this. Every time I podcast, there are literally like 10 different pieces that need to be in place, from the brainstorm to the publication and the social media posts and the blog posts that I do for every single episode. And so I actually had my sweet social media helper, Lizzie, create a sheet or a chart for me that I could check off and say, okay, I'm at this stage with this podcast and this stage with this podcast. And the reason why this is helpful is because I batch my podcasts. I don't want to do one podcast every week. That's not a good use of my time. And so I like to batch podcasts together, and I try to do at least 2 at a time. And I love to do like 4 or 5 at a time. That's the ideal. That's what we shoot for every time. And so, and the reason why I'm sharing this with you is because once you create a system, you have to get yourself to follow through on the system. And sometimes it takes a while. Sometimes it's like, okay, I shot for 4 podcasts. I only got 3 done. What didn't go well this week? And see if you can tweak that system so that the next time it's easier for you to batch 4 podcasts at a time, and then write 4 blog posts at a time, and publish 4 blog posts at a time, or whatever it is that you're doing. And so having a spreadsheet like that takes the what am I doing next off of my plate. I can look at the spreadsheet and I know exactly where I'm at in the process of creating that specific podcast. Now, for you, depending on what it is that you're doing, I'm sure there are things that are kind of routine about what it is that you're doing. And you want to create structure or systems around what it is that you're doing to offload some of that mental energy. The last thing that I want to say about routines is routines help you to know when it's work time and when it's not work time. Sometimes our creative outlets bleed into family life or into self-care time if we're not careful. So if we have a routine about when we start and when we stop, that helps us to know that the day is done, or this isn't when I'm working, this is when I'm focusing in on something else. So you want to spend time working on your systems, working on the routines that you want to have in place so that you are not trying to create 24/7, because that is exhausting. And I know sometimes when we run a business, when our creative outlet turns into a business, we feel like that's all we're thinking about. And that's all that we're doing is, when am I creating? How am I creating? Is this landing? Is this working? You know, all of those things. And it's just like, and now it's time for the brain to shut off. And so you want to have routines around the start and stop of your work time. The next thing that I want to say is you want to be able to prioritize your time block. And for me, this is, yeah, it's on the calendar, but it's emotionally how I'm showing up and viewing that time block, particularly if I'm the only one involved in that time block. So often it's easy for us to schedule on top of time blocks that we have that are just set aside for a creative outlet or something that's just for us. We can easily justify scheduling something on top of it. But if it is a priority, and I highly recommend that your creative outlets are priorities for you, if it is a priority, you want to hold that time block on your calendar like you would if you had an important appointment with somebody who you haven't seen in ages and you're really looking forward to spending that time with them. You want to think about that time with yourself the same way that you see it with someone else. And one of the things that I like to tell myself is I do have an appointment with someone important. It's me. And I'm not going to schedule anything on top of that, unless, of course, one of my kids breaks their arm or something. But I think we get in the habit of telling ourselves it's just not as important as my kids or my husband. When I did some exploration around these thoughts, I'm like, why are you telling yourself that? No one is making you choose. You can spend that time doing whatever it is that you want. And I think sometimes we think we need to be available for other people 24/7 just in case something happens. And I'm not trying to minimize when our kids or our families really need us, but that happens far less than when we're planning on it, I think, or when we're telling ourselves that we need to save this time just in case. What if someone needs me, right? I don't think that happens as often as we think. In fact, it happens for me far less than what I was actually worried about. So when I schedule that time for myself on my calendar, that's something that for me is non-negotiable. It's something that I'm not going to schedule on top of. And I know for some of you, this is a little trickier because you have little ones that nap and little ones that have schedules. In that case, you can have a floating time block. So it's not necessarily like from 11 to 1, for example, it's just during nap time. You're working on this thing and you're trying to get it done. The last thing that I want to say here about the physical aspect of creating is you want to prioritize your self-care. Creative work takes up a lot of energy. Sometimes it's really fun and it's free-flowing, and other times it feels like a slog. I'm not going to lie. Sometimes it's like, this needs to get done. I don't really feel like it today, and here we go. There's a lot of energy out, and even doing things that I absolutely love, like coaching or creating courses or teaching my yoga classes, what I realized is I need to create time to recharge my batteries even after teaching yoga, which kind of blew my mind, actually, when I realized that my body was starting to become more rigid. I was starting to lose flexibility because my yoga classes, when I'm teaching, are not for me. They're for my students. And there is an energy output that is involved in doing that. So I need to make sure that I'm scheduling yoga classes with teachers who are not me on my schedule in order to get that same recharge that I'm hoping that my students get in my classes, because I'm not getting that same outcome when I teach. Okay, the next thing that we want to talk about is the mental aspect of creating. So like I mentioned before, you want to just plan that your inner critic is going to be along for the ride. So I want you to just take a really deep breath in and just know that that's part of the creative process. But my recommendation is you get to work. You have to start creating something. You have to start going through the motions of creating in order to get into the flow. But in order to get into that flow state, you have to start, and it feels clunky. It feels like you're not good enough. It feels like this isn't worth your time. I mean, there's so much of that conversation that pops up when we get started, but if you keep going, oftentimes I found that it minimizes. So one of the things that I learned from Julia Cameron is you just have to write. Stephen Pressfield says the same thing. He's also a writer, but you just have to write. You have to set that time aside. And then oftentimes you kind of get out from underneath that layer of inner critic muck that happens when we are starting to create something, and we move on to the good stuff, like the stuff that's in our core that we want to let shine, but we're afraid. So once we kind of get through that first sticky spot of just creating things without judging what it is that we're creating, just keeping your pen moving on your paper, so to speak, whatever it is that you're doing, you get to that layer of good stuff that's in there. We all have it within ourselves, and we have to trust ourselves. We have to trust the process. And what I found is it's tough to silence the inner critic. What is most helpful for me is just understanding that this is part of the process. My inner critic is just going to be along for the ride. All right, the next thing is, of course, to stop comparing yourself. And I am just mentioning this as a little reminder. I know you know this, but it's so, so, so important for us when we are creating to just stay in our own lane. You don't want your stuff to look like anyone else's stuff. That's the truth. Because then it would be someone else's stuff. You would just be duplicating what is already out there. There is a level of discomfort in slowing yourself down and exploring what makes you unique and special and different. And like I said, this inner critic is going to be there and be like, it's not that special. You're not that unique. It's not that good. And that's okay. It's okay for your inner critic to be there, but you want to open up to the things that make you special. And the way that we do it is the process that I just told you. You have to just start. You have to get yourself to go. And then we start to kind of shed those layers of inner critic muck to actually get to what's there, the gold that's inside each of us that doesn't look like anyone else's gold. It looks like your own. And so the way to lean into these things is we have to be consistent. We have to get ourselves to sit down when it's uncomfortable, and we have to go. And this is hard. We want to be the same as other people who have success, but we can't be successful unless we are ourselves. And it takes courage to be authentic and vulnerable and us. It takes courage for us to show up 100% as ourselves and say, hey, this is what I have to give. This is what I have to offer. Are you in? You want to come with me? It takes courage to do that. Sometimes what makes us unique is also hard for us to see. This is something that I really struggled with because the things that are unique about me seem kind of boring to me. The things that make other people unique and special, I mean, that's like, wow, that's really cool about that person. But it's hard for us to see that within ourselves because it just feels like us. It's just kind of like, well, it's boring. I don't know if this is really anything anyone would want to know about because it just feels regular. It just feels like wah, wah, to us because it's us, right? So one of the ways to see what makes us special and unique is to ask people. You can ask your bestie, you can ask your spouse, you can ask your mom, and just ask them, what do you feel like makes me unique and what makes me special? All right, the next little piece of advice, I have two more left, is you have to stop judging yourself. And this is part of the inner critic, but oftentimes what happens is we have some version of this isn't good enough going on in our minds. Listen, it's okay. It's okay for you to have that little voice. What I want you to remember is that you can make a difference in the world by sharing your gifts and your talents just as you are right now. You do not have to change anything about yourself to help someone else along their path. I guarantee you, you are several steps ahead of the person that you would like to work with and the person that you would like to help. And you can help them right now without getting any extra certifications or any extra education or whatever. You can help them right now. I'm kind of speaking at this from my business model as a coach, but the truth is, wherever you're at with your art or your writing, you can help somebody right now. You don't have to be the best. I don't think there is a best. There are people who are further along in their creative path because they've been at it for a little while and their stuff looks really nice. It looks beautiful and amazing. And I'm going to tell you, you're going to get there too. But you have to start where you're at. You just have to be one step ahead of someone else. Your work when you get started might not look amazing, and that's okay. You will get better over time. But just stay focused on the people that will resonate with you and whatever it is that you are creating right now. All right, the last thing that I want to say is you have to practice celebrating all of your wins. I just finished reading The Gain and the Gap, and actually I've been reading this over several months. I've listened to it multiple times and I've read it. So if I have mentioned this before on the podcast, it's because I'm studying this book right now. But one of the things that Dan Sullivan shares in this book is you want to focus in on your gains. It's so easy for us to take a look at how far we have to go and compare ourselves to that versus comparing ourselves to how far we've come from where we've started. And when we're comparing ourselves with ourselves from where we started, we feel so much better about our journey because we're focusing in on our gains. When you're focusing in on how far you have to go, you're focusing in on the gap. Most of us are in the gap most of the time, unless we are focusing in and training our brains to stay more and more in the gain. What I want to say to you with this is you want to celebrate your wins. You want to spend a lot of time focusing in on what's working and just a little bit of time thinking about what's not working and then problem solve that. So I want you to ask yourself, what's working? What are you doing well? Are you creating a system right now that's helping you? Are you creating content right now that you know is going to get better over time? Are you learning more about your work ethic and when the best hours of the day are for you to create? There's so many things that we miss as far as what our wins are because we have this idea of what it should look like and we're not there yet. Again, comparing ourselves against the gap that just aren't helpful. So that's the last tip that I have to say, is to celebrate and just stay focused on your gains as you create and how you're getting better and how you're learning things about yourself. Because that really is kind of the fun thing, the fun side effect of creating is you get to develop a better relationship with you. All right, my friends, that is all I have to say for today. If this episode of the podcast was helpful to you, or you feel like it would be helpful to someone else that you know, I would love it if you shared this podcast with your friends or your families or anywhere on social media. That would be amazing. So go ahead, share away with all your loved ones. I would so appreciate it. All right, you guys, have a beautiful week. We will catch you guys soon. Take care. That's all for now. Bye-bye.